Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. As we heard in the introduction, my name is Joanna Braniff and I am the chair of the Northern Ireland Freshwater Task Force, and I'm also the Communications, All Ireland Communications and Advocacy Manager for the Rivers Trust. And you join us today I'm delighted to actually be hosting this meeting of minds where we're going to explore how we can engage communities to develop solutions for nutrient overload and algal blooms. And as we all know, everybody in this room knows, this issue affects not just water quality, but in fact, new research is coming out to show how, particularly with blue-green algae, how it impacts on the entire ecosystem. And that, of course, has a knock-on effect for human health, livelihoods, the economy, and has a very negative effect on our freshwater bodies. So today's session, we're going to have a conversation, but we'd like it to be very interactive. We'd like it to be collaborative, and we'd like to work towards some outcomes and insights that hopefully we can use going forward. So what we're going to look at today is we have some fantastic panelists with us, and we're going to cover three broad topics. We hope we're going to stimulate an insightful and informative conversation from our expert panelists. And as I say, we're going to try and explore some practical approaches for creating positive action and meaningful change. And the three areas that we're going to be looking at today with our experts are the impacts of climate change on fresh water bodies, how we can balance the protection of our freshwater resources with the needs of our economy, and the role of empowered communities in a catchment-based approach. So hopefully at the end, depending on how the discussion goes today, but I know some of the characters involved, so we might not have time for a Q&A at the end, but if we do, we'll obviously give you the opportunity to speak and put your questions to our panellists. If we don't have time, we really want to gather your opinions. So we're going to have a Slido option. And Katie, how do people click onto that? So by the magic of technology, we have a QR code here, and we'd like you to respond through Slido if you want. However, like myself, I'm a bit more old school. We also have pen and paper notebooks that we're going to give out to you. And what we would do is, for the people online, we would encourage you to respond to the conversations that appear in the Slido or make some notes in the chat function. For the people in the room, yes, please do respond to the questions that we have up, but I would caution that they're there just advisory. If you've got something else to say, please feel free to contribute. We're handing out notebooks for you, and we would ask you to make your notes in those notebooks, and we're going to ask you to hand them in again at the end of the day. So unfortunately, you can't take them away as a souvenir of your visit today, because we hope to gather some of your amazing insights and ideas, experiences. So as you're listening to the conversation today, if you could record anything that you think is relevant, you know, we want you also, if you could keep it in note form. And I'm the worst person to tell you this because my handwriting is terrible. I think I should have been a doctor. But if you could try and keep it legible for us, because we will be transcribing these at the end, and that it's going to be Katie's job. So she's asked me to say if you could keep it legible. But also as well, feel free to put your name on your notebook if you want to. But if you want to remain anonymous, of course, your insights are still valuable. So yes, feel free to put whatever you want in there, and don't put your name on it. But if you're open to further collaboration after this event, please put your name and contact details into the book. What we're hoping is that your notes will provide great insights and conversation points for our visioning session that we're going to have later on after our lightning talks. And what we want to do is build on the conversation that we've had today to explore solutions. So in that spirit, I would ask you to be solution orientated and invest this session, as we heard at the start, with compassion and love and positivity for yourself, for others, and for, most importantly, environment. Because in my experience, it is that love and compassion are the two most influential drivers of change. So it's important that we come from that point of positivity. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome a fantastic panel we've been able to invite along today. And I'm joined by three exceptional contributors who are going to bring a wealth, decades of experience and insight into today's discussions. First, we have Linda May, who's a freshwater ecologist at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and who leads Freshwater Restoration and Sustainability Group. Linda also manages Lough Erne's long-term monitoring project. We also have with us John Barry, who's Professor of Green Political Economy at Queen's University in Belfast, co-director of the Centre for Sustainability, Equality and Climate Action. And John is also the co-chair of the Belfast Climate Commission and the author of many, many influential books on the topics of economy and environment, a world expert in this topic. So please use the opportunity to draw on John's wisdom with this. Although he did caution me before we started the session that, and I thought it was a great phrase, he didn't want it to be the typical sage on the stage conversation. He wanted it to be a two-way dialogue because we think there are a lot of valuable ideas, solutions, energies and insights in the room completely, not just from the people on the stage. And last but not least, we have Mark Horton, who is the All-Ireland Director of the Rivers Trust and Chief Executive of Ballinderry Rivers Trust. And he also brings many years of extensive practical experience in both empowering communities to protect and improve their local waterways. And just for transparency, I work with Mark in the Rivers Trust. So we're going to begin. I think our panellists probably can describe what they do better than I can. So I'm going to ask Linda, John and Mark just to take 2 minutes to introduce themselves and tell us briefly about their current work and how it relates to our theme today of engaging communities as we develop solutions for nutrient overload and algal blooms. And if you don't mind, I'll start with Linda, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. You can stay seated there and use the mic from that position. Oh, yep, that's no problem. Do we have slides? Yep.
I can sound more convincing if I've got slides. Okay, so I've just picked a couple of slides from the talk that I gave yesterday. I spoke for 10 minutes yesterday. I think I've got a couple of minutes now just to summarise the main points. This slide summarises the main point, which is that water quality is getting worse. We're seeing lots and lots of algal blooms at the minute. They're driven by, hang on, there we go. They're driven by the amount of nutrients that are coming in from the catchment. They're also driven by the amount of sunlight and also by rising temperatures. The point that I wanted to make yesterday and today is that we can't cool the world down at the moment. We're doing our best. It's not really working. We can't turn off the sunlight. So the only thing we can control are the amount of nutrients, the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that are coming into our lakes and causing these algal blooms. Without those nutrients, these algae can't grow. So we really need to get control of those things which are coming from things that we do. So it's no good saying it's the water company or whatever, or the, I don't know what your environmental agencies here, they need to do something about it. These nutrients are coming from you, and you can all do something about it, and we'll pick that up later on. So in Scotland, we were asked, well, what happens if we don't? And so here are a couple of maps. On the left is if we take sustainable solutions and we do something about the amount of nutrients that we dump into our waters accidentally or otherwise. And on the left is what happens if we manage our catchment sustainably. And on the right, the red ones being the fail of water quality. They are the number of lochs in Scotland that will fail water quality by 2080 under climate change and under current conditions for managing catchments. So I'll just stop there, and I'm sure the rest of it will come out in the, yeah. So I've been, I don't want to talk for very long, and it's difficult to shut me up usually. So, but I've been working on this sort of thing for about 45 years, and what I notice is how much things have changed, and how much, particularly when I started work, conservation equaled keep everybody out. And now it's including everybody, and that brings with it its own challenges, which we need to address.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you. Next, I'd ask John to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about his work.
Sure. I recommend love and compassion of a wet, miserable morning like this, so well done. My work recently involves looking at crap, capitalism, and community. You know, particularly in terms of Lough Erne, what we see. It's essentially human and bovine crap. That's the major issue. Let's name it as it is. So we have to find a way of addressing that. Capitalism, I simply mean as a placeholder for the current way we organise our economy and how we've forgotten that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the natural system. You probably had this in your conference, water is life. Water is also the economy. So we have to basically attend to protecting nature to protect the economy. And particularly in relation to farming. This is not about individual farmers. They were simply doing a job they were asked to do since the Second World War in Britain and Ireland, and particularly here in Northern Ireland since the Going for Growth strategy. So what it has to do with this, we have to change the structure of the economy in relation to the agri-food system. And that leads me then to the last issue of community. We've just done a piece of research at Queen's on the emotional and mental health impacts of the crisis in Lough Erne, which is not the one that we often think of. We think about the science, the impacts on the economy, governance, and they're all important. But the reality is, as we'd say in Dublin, we're in a state of chassis. Our planetary systems are beginning to break down. Linda already mentioned the issue of climate. I don't call it climate change. I call it the climate crisis, the climate catastrophe. Because calling it climate change is like saying an invading army is unwelcome guests. It just doesn't touch the sides of what we're facing. But community also provides the solution. Farmers are not stupid, just to pick on that particular population that are really important. They are land owners, they're stewards of the land. They may not have the scientific background that geeks like me have, but that doesn't matter. We know that this year across the island of Ireland, about 20% of the potato crop has been lost because we couldn't basically get the harvest out of the field because of the flooding. And this weather we're now experiencing, this is not the new normal. The new normal, because of the baked-in climate impacts, is going to get worse. So the issue I'll just leave you with is we do have solutions, but we are going to have to start engaging our communities more because they can provide tailored, place-based solutions. And we're going to have to get used to adapting to an inevitably wetter, more turbulent ecosystems and weather patterns because we pumped up enough greenhouse gases now that even if we were to stop burning them, we still will deal with decades ahead. But I'm not downbeat. I mean, sometimes my students think I am depressed. I'm not depressed, but I may be a carrier, just given the knowledge that I have in terms of what's happening with our worsening planetary and ecological systems. But I do see the beginnings of a crisis in Lough Erne, an opportunity to basically face something that we have to face. Our current economic system, of which the agri-food system here is an example, is unsustainable. We simply cannot move in this direction in the future. And that's why I'd like to see, and maybe this was a discussion you had already, the importance of a just transition. How do we thank our farmers, for example, for all the work they've done? They were key workers during the pandemic, but to be honest with them and say, listen, we cannot continue with this agricultural system. And to our friends in Northern Ireland Water, because they're part of the story in Lough Erne, it's because of a lack of investment in infrastructure in wastewater treatment. We need to also include them. And the final thing I'd say is that we in the Academy should hang our heads in shame. Hang our heads in shame. We are part of the public sector. We have a public duty to help our communities. And unfortunately, we've not been doing that. There was a fantastic freshwater station in Trad Point in Lough Erne that was run by the University of Ulster. It was closed down over 10 years ago. So if anybody here in the public sector or in the community sector, please come and see me and my colleagues in the Academy. We are public sector workers. Your taxes pay for my wages. Obviously not for my dress, obviously. But we do need to see, we need partnerships between the public sectors in the DERA, for example, DFI here, universities. And I would also say, it might be controversial, where's the Orange Order? Where's the GAA? Where are our faith communities? This is a bigger issue than any one statutory organisation. So we have to include the community, not because it's nice. We've no other choice.
Thank you very much, John. That certainly opens lots of points of debate there. And finally, Mark, if you could pick up and introduce yourself and tell us about the work that you do.
Okay, thank you. So you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the island of Ireland. I grew up in the industrial West Midlands, surrounded by factories and canals, and all of our rivers had been buried underground. So I had the privilege of being taken on a school trip at a very young age to the source of the River Stour, and then we travelled down the river on a bus to where it met the River Severn. And I couldn't understand at that age how such a big river started as such a tiny trickle of water coming out of the ground. But I also couldn't understand why the river at the bottom smelt of vinegar. And there was a factory on the edge of that river that was pumping water into the river that was distilling vinegar. And even at that age, at about 6 or 7, I knew that wasn't right, because I could see there were boats in the river and people wanting to use the river. And this spurred something in me to want to work with rivers for the rest of my life. And I am really passionate about what I do. And I get told often that I'm lucky because I'm paid to do a hobby, basically. It's what I love doing. And when I came to Northern Ireland, I found another group of people who were equally moved by the position they found themselves in on their own river. The angling clubs and the communities on the Ballinderry River, who were so devastated about what was happening to their river, fish kills, wildlife dying, people not being able to use the river, that they had come together and formed an organisation, an association, and that provided a model for other people to be able to do it, an empowerment model for anybody to get involved in protecting their local river. And that has gone on to be a model that others have adopted to form what we're now calling rivers trusts. But they're all community-led associations. They're not set up by government. They're set up because communities are animated and exercised about what's happening in their local water environment, and they want to do something to turn that around. And sometimes rivers trusts can be seen as, you know, just a bunch of local people who are getting uppity about what's happening in their local rivers, but they're not. There's so much more than that because of the passion and the knowledge that those people have and the willingness to engage with others to make things work. So now, in my own personal journey, I'm helping more of those organisations set up right across the island of Ireland, but also expanding the work of the Rivers Trust to engage the farmers that John was talking about, who are just one tiny element of what we keep calling community. And I ask myself and I ask others, what do we mean by community? Because everyone wears more than one hat. And to me, I think we need to think about catchment communities. All of the people who live and work and play within a certain water body, who depend on it, but also have an opportunity to influence it, both negatively and positively. And it's not at the top of people's agendas. When they get up in the morning, they're worried about getting the children to school. They're worried about, you know, what they're going to have for dinner, how they're going to pay the bills. But we need to turn round what's happening and relate it back to people's lives, because this affects everybody. So the Rivers Trust is about engagement. It's about making people see that we all depend on this water. And at the end of the day, we all drink the same water. So community empowerment, I think, is key to how we're going to improve our water resources, because without community, we're lost.
Thanks very much, Mark. So as you can see here, we have a range of experience and expertise on the panel with us, and we want to really engage with that, and we want you to engage with that. So the first session we have are Slido questions. If you want to join the Slido function there, whether you're online or in the room, or feel free, as God intended, to record it in your notebook with a pen. So the first topic that we're going to touch upon is climate change, or changing climate, or climate crisis, as John has framed it, and the impact on our freshwater resources. And what we're seeing here is, before I came to do this event, I did a bit of research and kind of looked at attitudes to climate change, and I specifically looked at Northern Ireland, because that's one of our areas of focus. And what you find within the studies that have been done is the general public, there's a recognition that the climate is changing. there's concerns. We're hearing a lot about climate anxiety. Very often people feel overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. It seems out of their control. They push back. They feel within these surveys, the majority of people feel that it's somebody else's responsibility. And so I want to explore that with you, Linda. So based on your experience, what's your perspective on the gap between awareness and action when it comes to the public?
I think people are becoming more and more aware of climate change because they see the flooding, they see the storms, they see the sometimes really nice warm weather that we're having in the summer, which sounds nice, but actually our ecosystems really don't respond very well to it. I think in terms of actions, I think people don't really know what they can do. Yeah. They feel that we talk about keeping emissions of carbon dioxide down. We know that people want to help because they will go and change light bulbs, or some people have been made to change light bulbs now, but right from the beginning, people were quite happy to change a light bulb if they thought it would help. We see people going out and planting trees. We're not really sure if they're putting them in the right places, but people are all trying to help. I think it's important, though, that we can channel what we understand better so that people feel that they're making a difference. Because at the minute, a lot of it's quite random. Yeah, people tend to feel they're victims of climate crisis without really much opportunity to step in and do something on that. Right. And John, if you wouldn't mind just following up on that, because I know you've worked extensively on the political and economic aspects of climate change. Can you give us some insight on how you think we can help society, especially policymakers and the business community, to understand that climate change isn't just an environmental issue and it directly impacts on essential resources and on our economy?
Sure, but first of all, Damien in the audience program has an M and an E at the end. Want to resist American linguistic. Want to resist American linguistic colonization. Damien, ME, programs, MES. Sorry, it's the academic in me. I think climate change, or the climate crisis as I described it, it's a bit like Brendan Behan when he described there was never a situation that the addition of a policeman didn't make worse. In that the climate is like adding extra energy from a thermodynamic physical point of view that's basically cooking the planet. It's the reason why as the air warms up, we get more moisture has to go somewhere. So we're going to experience the climate crisis in terms of storm surges and flooding. And part of that issue, to come to the question that you asked, Joanne, is that we lack, certainly in the policy community and the political class and our business class, never mind in our communities, we lack climate literacy, a basic understanding of how the climate system actually works and our dependence for everything that we have on the resources of the earth. I'll ask you a question that's often good at a dinner party or when you start. Don't do this after a few points, but it's good to do it beforehand. Can you name anything in this room that has not been made in whole or part or transported here in whole or part without use of fossil fuels? The very energy that's causing the climate crisis. That's the challenge. That's what I mean by climate and carbon literacy, in the understanding that the human economy, everything we have, is dependent upon nature. There's nothing that has not had some connection with the natural world. It's essentially an input-output system. We take resources from the earth, we make them, we use them in technology and so on, we consume them, and then we issue them out the other end in terms of pollution or effluent. And the issue here is we never get to a zero pollution or effluent economy, is that we're now overloading natural systems, often with artificial effluent and pollution that the earth simply cannot absorb. That's part of the issue. So we do need to start talking about things like the circular economy. We should mimic nature. There's no waste in nature. You know, technically speaking, or just a simple way of understanding it, pollution is matter out of place. Human or cow crap in a lake is pollution because it's matter out of waste. There are other ways we can use that resource, because that's what they are. Waste is resource. Whenever we see pollution problems, that is a lost resource. You know, many of you probably don't even know that back in the day, there was something called night soil. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Yeah. And there was a business. That's why if you dig in our cities in Britain and Ireland, outside cities, you'll find pots, chamber pots, because there were people who actually made a business in terms of taking human excrement to be used to spread. Now, it sounds disgusting to us today in the modern world, and I'm not saying we're going back to that, but there's something around us understanding that we need to get to that circular economy in terms of a regenerative understanding of how we make food, how we transport ourselves without negative impacts on the environment. So for me, I think we're at the beginnings of that wake-up call. You know, I was talking earlier to Michelle, local artist here, or visiting here, go and have a chat with her. About often I find when people are faced with the reality of how bad things are, we go through what's called the Kubler-Ross emotional cycle. I don't know if that's familiar to you. So it comes from psychology, that when you're given very bad news, you know, a diagnosis, a friend has died, but it's now been applied to this issue we're talking about, and our first reaction is to deny it, shock. We don't know, we can't accept. How could they have died because they had a good life? They didn't smoke and so on. And I think many of us are in that position, well, particularly if you're Sammy Wilson, you probably still are in terms of climate denial. The next stage then is anger, probably still Sammy Wilson, in terms of you get angry about it. And then depression. This is a natural way of relating to the shocking facts. And that's all I'm giving you. You know, don't kill the messenger. I'm just simply giving you the way the world is now. And it is okay to feel not okay. Again, the importance of that emotional connection. And I'm describing you here my daily life, by the way. So you go through the shock, anger, depression, and then over time you get to some resolution. But the resolution, to go back to the question Joanne asked previously, is by coming together. It's by coming together. We cannot solve this on our own. I've already mentioned in my own opening remarks, no one institution, organization in our society is going to solve this. Elon Musk ain't going to solve it. The government is not going to solve it. Businesses by themselves aren't going to solve it. Farmers by themselves. It has to be all of us working together. And that's why, you know, certainly as an educator, it's a great privilege to be teaching young minds every year, is that what I've noticed over the last number of years is many of my students are showing signs of eco-anxiety. I never thought I'd have to do this as an educator, but it shows you the seriousness of the crisis. I now put trigger warnings on the courses I teach, not just be aware of my very bad dress sense or my occasional use of bad language, but actually to ask my students to monitor their own emotional reactions. Because a lot of them feel powerless. And we should feel angry that there are solutions that are not being applied. But for me, the best way of addressing this is to have a sense of hope. And I'll just briefly finish up, Joanna, in terms of the difference between hope and optimism. Optimism is what we say on this island, it'll be grand. That's a happy sense, it's all going to work out somehow. We'll have a tech solution or somebody else is going to do it. But the problem with that optimism is it's passive. It requires nothing of us. Somebody or something else is going to solve it. Hope is very different. Hope has to be active. You've got to do something. There has to be a sense of agency, and that's what I mean by us coming together. But before we come together, we all have to agree on an analysis of the problem. And that's part of the issue we're in now, that we're not all quite agreed on what the problem is. But we are, I think, getting there in terms of conversations like this, open and honest conversations. This is far, far too serious to be left to academics. In fact, it's so serious now, even the introverts are needed. This is a really significant existential crisis that we're facing. We have ecocide happening on our doorstep in Lough Erne. I'm not a marine biologist, you know, other people on the panel are. Well, my colleagues at Queen's tells me it's going to be at least 2 decades before Lough Erne recovers. You know, the fly that is an essential part of the ecosystem there, you know, it's not gone extinct. Nature's quite resilient. But we have to begin by an analysis of where we're at. Because in the words of James Baldwin, wonderful, great American author, he said this: not everything that is faced can be overcome, but nothing can be overcome until it's faced.
Thank you, Jean. That's very inspiring words there. And I think you touched on a point that's not often focused on. We tend to look at the practicalities, we look at the financial impacts, but we often don't focus on the emotional impacts for us as human beings to see areas that we love and we value either under strain or it looks like it's literally dying in front of our eyes. And Mark, just on that point, you know, you're involved in designing and delivering large-scale, often government-backed projects or EU-backed projects to reduce pollution at source. So we're not the ambulance parked at the bottom of the cliff. We're trying to stop the pollution. In your experience, is that changing climate being factored into government thinking, particularly in the planning and funding of on-the-ground projects like the Sustainable Catchment Programme?
Yes, so I just want to touch on something John said there as well about the kind of emotional effect that this is having on people. We're going on to farms on a daily basis and speaking to landowners who are in distress. And it's not just about the finance of the farm or making the business work. It's about not knowing what to do or who to turn to for help. And being able to come to an independent organisation that isn't going to prosecute them by simply admitting that something is going wrong on the farm is part of the relief that is needed in order for everyone to play their part. So I just wanted to address that point because I think it is very, very important. But with funding streams coming forward now, everything is hanging off climate change in all of the descriptors of what we want to see delivered, the outputs of projects, how projects need to work together. It's all framed around the climate crisis, the water crisis, and the biodiversity crisis, and that's very admirable. But you then look to see that the funding for projects is only available for 12 months, or it's only available for 2 years, and you might not get it afterwards. And you have to ask yourself, what can we do with the limited resources that we have? Why is this not getting more joined up? Why are we not looking at an all-island approach to managing these ecosystems, our environment? Because this island isn't that big, and you know these issues and problems do not stop at borders, and we can't try to plan for the change that we need to make if we're only resourced to do it for 12 months at a time. So, you know, it's a very mercenary view to take on it. You know, it's the finance, but at the end of the day, in order for everyone to play their part, we have to be enabled to play our part. And part of that is how we finance what needs to be done on the ground and the support that we can give people. But it's also about having the longevity and the forward look on where we want to get to in 2, 5 and 10 years time, and we're unable to do that. That's my opinion, that we're unable to do that in any meaningful way because we are limited by all of these man-made barriers, let's say, to our greater intention of what we want to achieve. So in answer to your question, I think everybody is talking about climate change, and we're talking about the water crisis, the biodiversity crisis, but I don't think at a government level, I don't think we're committed to it.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously, I'm speaking from the position of Northern Ireland. We are somewhat behind the curve when it comes to legislation, understanding, investment and prioritising of the environment for obvious reasons, given the history that we've had. And just actually on that, we're going to move on to very quickly. And if we ask you just to keep your answers concise on this, because we're moving on time-wise from a couple of things I'd really like for us to touch on, because we wanted to feed into your visioning session later on today. John, just on the point of finance there, and I know that we've kind of talked about this on a number of occasions, so we're going to move the Slido questions on here. So how do we see investment in the protecting our water quality, it being seen as an investment rather than a burden all the time? Because all we ever hear when we talk about these things is costs, we can't afford it. And, you know, as Linda's already flagged up there with her interactive maps, in my personal opinion, we can't afford not to do it. So, John, how do we shift that thinking to it being an investment rather than a burden?
Well, I think there's two parts of that. One is that it's cheaper to invest now to prevent a future harm or loss. You fix the roof when it's sunny, not when it's raining. And that's what effectively we're doing. We're playing catch up, and it's going to be costly. And this is a problem that we often see, particularly now with the new Labour government. There's no money. There's nonsense. The state is not like a household, folks. The state cannot run out of that which itself creates, which is money. Do we think Churchill, during the Second World War, said, oh, how are we going to pay for the war? Let's raise some taxes and so on. No. The only thing we need to start considering, this is the issue of carbon literacy and beginning to move into a different paradigm in our thinking about the economy and government finances. Do we have the actual assets, the trained people, the capital, the resources to enable us to do the things we want, in this case, remediate, regenerate our water courses? I can make a political point. Isn't it funny how there's always money for war and not for the NHS? The UK and other governments could find billions to send to Vladimir Zelensky in their fight against the Russians and to Benjamin Netanyahu in the genocide in Gaza. So what I'm telling you here, folks, is do not buy the Kool-Aid. There is no money. Households, yes, we need to earn money or borrow. Governments don't need to do that. The issue is, to, in a way, what I'm framing this as wartime mobilization. I'm not telling everybody here's not going to agree with that. But to me, looking at the science, looking at the worsening empirical evidence of the rivet popping of our life-supporting systems, we are now in a crisis. Hands up, anyone here who knew, I'm presuming most of you are from Britain or Ireland, did you know that the main national or regional governance bodies that you all belong to have declared a climate and ecological emergency? Did you know that? The British Parliament in May 2021, the Irish Dáil a week later, the Northern Ireland Parliament when it got back up and running last time in 2022. But, forgive my French, WTF, question mark. What does it mean? So our governments have declared emergencies, but how would any of us know, living in Fermanagh, or where I live outside Belfast, that our lives are going to be different? I tell you what is an emergency: the pandemic. Why have we lost the lessons of what happened there in a state-led but society-supported reaction to an emergency? So again, I'm not saying this to frighten people. I am just looking coldly and clinically at the evidence. Like a doctor diagnosing a patient, we are killing the planet. And in that, we're killing ourselves. A bit like sitting on a branch, sawing away and calling it progress. So we need to get woke. Wake up. Start understanding the seriousness of the situation. And we do have solutions. There's lots of technological and other solutions that we have. But we have to bring people with us. We can't be telling people, nagging them about what they do. We need to bring people along with us. But I do think we have to start from a full recognition of the seriousness of what not maybe our generation, looking at all the greybeards in the room like me, it's our kids and grandkids. They're going to inherit a much more degraded world. That's going to be much more difficult to have a decent quality of life. That's what we're in a fight for. The earth will shrug humanity off like a bad cold. Many of you may know or may not know, the earth has seen 5 other great mass extinctions, where up to 90% of all life was out. The last one was the dinosaurs with the meteor. What we're in the battle here for is not the earth. That idea is saving the earth. The earth is pretty tough. What we're in a battle for is a habitable world and systems of life support for our kids and grandkids.
Thanks for that, John. Now, maybe we only have literally maybe 1 minute left on this, Mark. So I was keen that we'd move on because I want to get a response on the slide on this as well. We have been speaking a lot. We use the word community a lot. And I know we've talked about this between us ourselves before. But what does that word actually mean? And you wanted to look at this from a catchment-based approach. How do you think this impacts on the discussion that we're having here, the definition of a community?
Well, I touched on it earlier on when I said that, we can debate long and hard what we mean by community, but to me, anybody that's living in a catchment area is the community of that environment, and that is the scale at which we need to manage the landscape. But people don't know that they live in these environments. They don't understand necessarily how the water and the air and the land are connected within their local area. So being able to educate people on their position within their community, within their catchment, and the role they can play to make a difference is the only way we're going to kind of wake people up, as John said, to say, this isn't someone else's problem, this is my problem. And just around the subject of Lough Erne, and I'm conscious of time, there was a lot of disinformation, there was a lot of fear around what happened in Lough Erne, and what people need are facts, because that's what you can act on. People were running around worried they couldn't drink their tap water or give that water to babies and so on. Simple, clear information and facts that people can act on is what is essential in any crisis, and that's the only way you can manage your way out of it. And that has been sorely lacking in the whole water crisis that we see right across the island of Ireland, and no admission of how each and every one of us has a responsibility to play a part in turning that around.
And as we found during kind of the course of our work as well, we find that the public are very disconnected from their water. They're disconnected from rivers. They see it as somebody else's issue, somebody else's system. They don't understand what catchment is. So that, you know, there's a job of work for us as ENGOs and experts on this, and as members of these communities. And we don't want that to become, because as we know in Northern Ireland, the word community can be used in a divisive way as well, and we've also seen that happening. So, you know, we're keen to change the language around this and make community empowerment something that's a goal that will actually help us move forward and help us deliver solutions. So that kind of, unfortunately, I think we could have sat here all day and discussed this with our experts here. Unfortunately, we don't have time for a Q&A. I mean, frantically waved that at the back to get off. So if I could ask you to show your appreciation for our three panellists who I think have given us a great insight. Thank you. And I would also like to thank you for your time and attention and engagement, and hopefully your sharing of expertise. So what I would say is keep your notebooks handy, because we've got a few fantastic lightning sessions coming up here. Gather your insights and your ideas that have been generated from this session and the sessions that we're going to have coming up, and maybe other sessions that you've attended over the last couple of days. Bring your ideas and your energy to our visioning session, which is starting at 11:45. And I would just like to say thank you very much for that. And I'm going to hand over now to, I think it's Lisa Kirkwood from the Riverfly Partnership. Thank you very much.